Hello, and welcome back to Thinking Deliberately. Over the last few episodes, we've asked some fairly uncomfortable questions, like what does it actually mean to think like an adult? And why does so much education teach knowledge without developing awareness? And what does it really mean to teach deliberately? Today's episode is episode 17, Kaizen for the Mind, how continuous cognitive growth really works. So today, I want to finish this season, because it's a very short season, with what I think is some very good news. Because here's something the self-development industry probably doesn't want you to hear. You're probably not one breakthrough away from becoming a better person. You're one moment of awareness away. And those aren't the same things. We've become addicted to breakthroughs like life-changing seminars or transformational retreats, the perfect morning routine, or a personality test that's going to tell us everything. What about a spiritual awakening? We love the idea that one extraordinary moment changes everything. It's a wonderful story. It also happens to be largely fiction. Real development is usually much quieter than that. It happens 5 seconds earlier. That's the phrase I'd like you to remember just today. 5 seconds earlier. The Japanese have a lovely word, Kaizen. Means continuous improvement. If you've done business degrees or anything like that or read a few books, you've probably heard of it. Tiny refinements, tiny adjustments, repeated over time, not dramatic revolution or heroic transformation, just consistent improvement. I think adult development works in exactly the same way. Not Kaizen for factories, Kaizen for the mind. Because real development rarely arrives as a lightning bolt. It arrives as slightly earlier awareness. So yesterday you noticed your defensiveness an hour earlier. Today you noticed it after 10 minutes. Tomorrow, perhaps after 30 seconds. Eventually, you notice it before you speak. Now, I call that your dynamic intelligence awareness model. But we're going to go through it from a Kaizen perspective. Because that's development. Not because you've become a different person. Because awareness arrived earlier. Think about how often people say, I know exactly what my problem is. Well, maybe they do. But knowledge isn't the same as availability. You can understand your patterns brilliantly and still repeat them tomorrow. We've all done it. I know I shouldn't react like that. I know I take criticism personally. I know I like to interrupt. I can overthink things. Yeah, but when did you notice all those? During, afterwards, or before? That's the real developmental question. Because development doesn't happen when you understand yourself. Development happens when awareness arrives early enough to create another choice. And that's why constructive development theory puts awareness in the middle. Not because awareness sounds fashionable, because awareness changes timing. And timing changes everything. Imagine somebody criticizes you. One version of you reacts immediately, defends, explains, interrupts. You try and win as if it's an argument, but you lose the relationship. Another version notices, I'm becoming defensive. That tiny moment changes the future. Nothing magical happened. Awareness simply arrived sooner. From a cognitive intention perspective, you're looking at own partner observer, and it's your capacity to stop and step back that's key. Now, multiply that across a lifetime. A marriage, classroom, leadership, police, interviews, board meetings. 1 second earlier, one question earlier, one breath earlier. Tiny improvements, huge consequences. And that's Kaizen for the mind. I sometimes think we've misunderstood what growth looks like. We imagine climbing a mountain. Perhaps growth is learning to notice the next step. We imagine becoming enlightened. Perhaps growth is becoming slightly less automatic. That's what I think, actually. We imagine replacing our personality. Perhaps growth is recognizing that the personality, currently speaking, isn't the only response available. And that is a much gentler idea. And I think a much more realistic one. As I said in my book, personality at the highest levels of the awareness quotient is actually a choice. There's no such thing as personality. Constructive development theory isn't asking you to reinvent yourself every Monday morning. It's asking something much simpler. What are you constructing right now? What are you intending? What has become available to awareness? What choices are actually present? And what response are you about to make real? Those 4 questions eventually become the backbone of CDT. Not because they're clever, but because they work. But notice something. There is no judgment in those questions, only curiosity. Development isn't about becoming someone else, it's about becoming increasingly curious about the person currently constructing reality. That changes how we think about mistakes as well. Most people hate discovering that they've just repeated an old pattern. I thought I'd dealt with that, and I can't believe I reacted like that again. I've learned nothing. Well, maybe perhaps you have. Perhaps awareness simply arrived later than you hoped. So it's still information and it's still development. The question isn't, why am I still like this? The better question is, what became visible this time that wasn't visible before? And that one question changes failure into data, into information. And that's one of the things I love most about Kaizen. It removes the drama. You don't need to become perfect. You simply need to notice a little sooner next time. And that also protects us from one of the biggest traps in self-development, identity. I am healed, I am transformed, I am my best self. Maybe. Or perhaps you've simply constructed another identity to defend. Development isn't another identity. It's increasing freedom from needing one. The more aware we become, the less trapped we become by the self that we happened to construct yesterday. And that's why growth isn't linear. You'll be wonderfully aware at work and ridiculous at home. Patient with strangers, impatient with family. Brilliant in the classroom, hopeless in traffic. Maybe even compassionate with clients and then furious with your broadband provider. Welcome to being human. Development isn't carrying awareness everywhere. It's making awareness available more often in more places, under more pressure. And that's a lifetime's work. And that's perfectly fine, because nobody graduates from awareness. No leader is finished, no teacher is finished, coach, parent, psychologist, they're not finished. The day we think we've finished developing, we've probably just stopped noticing ourselves. And that's why I no longer like the phrase lifelong learning. I'd rather talk about lifelong awareness. You can collect knowledge forever, frameworks, qualifications, certificates, that kind of thing. And you can fill shelves with it all, but that doesn't guarantee development. The real question is much simpler. Can you notice more today than you could yesterday? Can awareness arrive a little earlier? Can you hold uncertainty a little longer? Can you become slightly less automatic? In psychology, that's called automaticity. Because that's how the world changes. Not through perfect people, through people who become fractionally more aware before they respond. Let's think about it. Let's put it in context of teachers. A teacher notices the urge to rescue too quickly. Students think more. A leader notices defensiveness. The meeting changes. A parent notices frustration before shouting. A child experiences a different home. So, tiny awareness, large consequences. That is Kaizen for the mind. Small improvements in awareness create large improvements in environments. And that makes development an ethical responsibility. What we're saying is that with a small improvement in awareness, how you then construct the world changes. And that change leads to different behaviors. And the people around you are going to notice this. Because our level of awareness isn't just about our own business. Other people live inside it. So how do we practice? Not with grand promises or, New Year's resolutions. Ask yourself 4 questions. Do it first thing in the morning, or depending on when you're listening to this. What am I intending? What am I becoming aware of? What choices are genuinely available? What response am I about to construct? Then tomorrow evening, don't ask whether you became a different person. Ask one simpler question. Did awareness arrive slightly earlier today than it did yesterday? If the answer is yes, development has already happened, however small it felt. Before we finish, let's think back over this last 4 episodes. We began by asking what it means to think like an adult. We discovered adulthood isn't really about age, it's about awareness. And then we asked whether education develops awareness. Too often it develops performance. And then we asked what teachers really teach. We discovered they teach their relationship with thinking. And today we've arrived somewhere surprisingly hopeful. Development doesn't require a new life. It requires a new moment. One earlier moment of awareness, repeated again and again, and that's how adults develop. Not through breakthroughs, but through practice. And not through perfection, but through attention. Not through becoming someone else, through becoming increasingly aware of the person they're constructing in this moment. So here's today's uncomfortable question. Are you waiting for your life to change? or are you waiting for your awareness to arrive? Because they're not the same thing. This is thinking deliberately, and today's uncomfortable thought is this: you do not become wiser all at once. You simply become aware, slightly earlier than you were yesterday. And if you keep doing that, your whole life quietly changes. Thank you.